There's a sound that doesn't belong on dry land. If you've ever been near the ocean during a storm, you know it. The hollow knock-knock of something striking the hull of a boat, echoing off the water like a bone against a coffin lid. Out on the sea, it's expected. But when that sound carries to the steps of your rented beach house after midnight, when every sane thing should be asleep, that's when it becomes a sound that belongs to the dead. The Amalfi Coast glistened like a postcard when the Rossi family arrived in early July. The lemon groves were fat and bright, the air heavy with salt and sweetness. To Marco Rossi, it felt like a rebirth. Rome had been choking him his job at the insurance office, the buzzing city heat, the endless gray of apartment blocks. Here, there was light. Blue water spread in every direction, too wide and beautiful to hold any secret, or so he thought. The beach house came cheap. Too cheap. He almost didn't believe the price when he saw the listing online. La Casa del Mare. Historic property. Seaside view. Spacious. The kind of place you'd expect to cost a fortune in tourist season. Dead. It was barely more than what he paid for 3 weeks of groceries in the city. When he called the number, an old woman answered. Her voice was dry and papery, like paper crumbling in the wind. Yes, she said, it is available. You will find it suitable. But you must remember one thing. Marco laughed. What's that? Do not open the door after midnight, no matter how many times it knocks? Her words lingered. But only in the way a superstition does. It's like a bit of salt in your teeth after swimming. He brushed it off and told his wife Clara it was just an old woman's attempt to make the house sound mysterious. It's a sales tactic. Nothing more. But the house did not need tactics. When they first saw it, the Rossi children Elena, 12, and Matteo, 6, sprinted ahead of their parents, their bare feet slapping the worn stone path. The house stood only 20 meters from the water, perched on a spit of rocky shore, where the tide came whispering in like an uninvited guest. Its walls were the color of old bone, pitted by salt and time, and its wooden shutters hung crooked, as though exhausted from holding back decades of storms. Clara frowned at it, shielding her eyes from the sun. It looks... Character, Marco said with a grin, setting down the bags. Right. These old houses breathe, you know. They hold stories, Elena shouted from the front steps. There's a balcony and a spiral staircase. Just don't run too far in, Clara warned automatically. But her voice trembled faintly, though she couldn't have said why. They unpacked, they settled, they laughed. They made spaghetti with clams and ate on the balcony, while the sun fell into the water like a burning coin. The air was thick with promise. Sometime after midnight, when the children were asleep and Marco was drifting in the living room armchair, it came knock, 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 3 slow raps at the sea-facing door. Marco woke, heart thudding. He listened, the sound repeating itself once, twice more. He thought of the old woman's voice on the phone. Do not open the door after midnight. He didn't open it. He told himself it was just driftwood knocking against the shore, though he knew the sound came from the wood of the door itself, hollow and close. He poured himself a glass of wine to calm his nerves. He sat in the dim kitchen, staring at that door. On the other side, the sea breathed like a sleeping beast. And still, he did not open it. Not that night, not yet. Morning brought sunlight sharp enough to burn away doubts. The house didn't look so menacing in daylight. It looked like every other weather-beaten villa along the coast. With salt stains licking the walls and vines gripping the stone as if afraid to let go, Marco convinced himself the knocks were only his imagination. He hadn't been sleeping well in Rome, and stress did strange things to the mind. Besides, the children were thrilled. Elena discovered an old set of seashells in a carved wooden bowl by the fireplace and arranged them into patterns. Matteo ran from room to room with the wild joy only 6-year-olds can muster, calling every closet a secret cave. Clara, however, was not at ease. She lingered near the sea-facing door after breakfast, her eyes tracing the warped wood. It looks swollen, she said, like it's been wet. Marco kissed her shoulder. Of course it's wet. It's 20 meters from the sea. Everything here is wet, but Clara didn't smile. She pressed her palm against the door as if testing for a heartbeat. Did you hear anything last night? Marco lied. Just the waves. They spent the day exploring the village. Amalfi shimmered like a painting whitewashed walls, bougainvillea spilling from balconies, narrow streets that smelled of coffee and lemon rinds. The locals were polite but distant. When Marco mentioned the beach house, their smiles tightened. Casa del Mar, the grocer repeated, handing over a bag of oranges. Strange place. Cheap rent. Why strange? Marco asked. The grocer shrugged. Old houses have history. Some histories are heavier than others. When Marco pressed, the man only shook his head and said, "Lock your doors, especially the one by the sea." That night, Clara insisted on bolting every window and door. Even Alina rolled her eyes but did not protest. The family gathered in the living room for cards until past 11, the sound of laughter clashing against the hush of waves outside. By midnight, the children were in bed, the wine was poured, and silence returned. Then came the sound again. Knock, knock. Marco froze with the glass halfway to his lips. The sound was deliberate. 3 slow beats, heavy, patient. He looked at Clara, who went pale. "You heard it too?" she whispered. He nodded. The knocks came again, louder this time. Knock, knock. Something dripped on the floor. Marco glanced down, just condensation from his glass. But in that moment, he imagined black water sliding beneath the door, pooling around his feet. "Don't," Clara said quickly when she saw him rise. "Don't go near it." They sat there. 2 adults with their hearts hammering like frightened children, while the sound came and went until dawn. And in the silence after it stopped, Clara asked softly, "What happens if someone answers?" Marco had no reply. Children notice things adults won't, or maybe can't. Their brains haven't, yet built the walls we rely on to keep the dark out. By the 3rd day in the beach house, Alina and Matteo were noticing too much. Alina came to the breakfast table with her face pale, hair sticking to her forehead in dark ropes. "I dreamed someone was knocking," she said, her eyes fixed on the slice of bread she tore apart. Clara froze in the middle of pouring coffee. Marco forced a chuckle. "That's just because you heard us moving around. Houses creak at night." It wasn't creaking. Alina glanced at the sea-facing door, then lowered her voice. It was coming from there. Clara reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand a little too tightly. "It was only a dream, tesoro. Don't worry." But Matteo was smiling. "I heard it too." Both parents turned. "At my window," he said proudly, as though sharing a secret, someone was tapping with their nails. Like this. He rapped his knuckles against the table in 3 measured beats. Knock, knock, knock. Marco's skin prickled. Matera hissed, "Don't play games, Matteo." "I'm not," Matteo said hotly. She was wet. "Who?" Marco asked, his voice catching. "The lady." Matteo pointed toward the sea-facing door. "The lady who comes at night. She said she wants to come in." The kitchen went deathly silent, except for the sound of the waves. Elena shoved her chair back and stormed away. He's making it up. But her voice wobbled, betraying her. Clara stood abruptly. "That's enough. No more talk like that. Both of you go get ready. We're going to town. The rest of the day." Clara was jumpy, snapping at the kids, her eyes darting to every window. Marco tried to reason with himself. It was children's imagination. Kids soak up tension like sponges. If they overheard the knocks, they turned it into monsters. That's what kids do. But that night, long after the children were in bed, he found Alina standing in the hallway. She was staring at the sea-facing door. "Alina," he whispered. She didn't turn her head. She was waiting. Marco felt a surge of anger born from fear. Back to bed. Now. Alina looked up at him finally, her eyes wide, frightened. "She says she's already inside." Marco carried her to bed, whispering promises he didn't believe. But when he came back to the living room, Clara was waiting for him, white-faced, pointing at the floor by the sea-facing door. There, on the worn tiles, were 3 wet footprints. Marco crouched near the wet marks, his knees popping, his breath shallow. The tiles were old terracotta, pitted and stained, but the footprints were fresh, glistening under the weak glow of the ceiling bulb. Small, almost childlike, with water trailing toward the center of the room before fading, as though the thing that left them had evaporated. "It's the children," Marco said, his voice breaking in its own weakness. "They must have tracked water inside after washing up." Clara stared at him, her hands gripping her arms so tight her knuckles shone white. "They were in bed hours ago. They could have gotten up, Marco." Her tone was flat, final. "Don't lie to yourself. Not now." Silence thickened between them. Beyond the door, the sea hissed against the rocks. endless, restless. Clara moved suddenly, marching toward the door as though some instinct pulled her. Marco leaped to block her. "What are you doing? I just want to look," she said. "Open it and look. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe there's no one there at all." Her hand touched the latch. Marco grabbed her wrist. "No, the old woman told me," her eyes flashed. "The what?" He swallowed hard. He hadn't told her before, but now the words tumbled out. The phone call, the warning, the voice like dry leaves whispering, "Do not open the door after midnight." Clara recoiled as if struck. "And you didn't tell me?" "Thought it was just a story," Marco said weakly. "A superstition, something to scare tourists." But Clara wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the wood of the door itself. She knew, whoever she was, she knew that night neither of them slept. The knocks came again, steady, deliberate, starting at 1 o'clock and lasting until nearly 4. Each sound echoed through the walls and into their bones. The children slept through it, mercifully or perhaps not mercifully at all. Marco and Clara sat huddled in the kitchen with a single lamp burning, clutching coffee mugs that went cold in their hands. When the knocking finally ceased, the silence it left behind felt even more dangerous. By dawn, Marco's nerves snapped. He called the old woman. Her voice answered after 3 rings, the same papery rasp. "We're renting your house, We're renting your house, the beach house." A pause. "Ah, you've heard it then." His throat closed around the words. "What is it?" Another pause, as if she were debating whether he was worthy of the truth. Finally, she whispered, "It is a guest who drowned long ago. She comes back. Always back. Do not open the door. Promise me, Clara." Listening on the extension, hissed into the line, "Why rent this place at all, if you knew?" The old woman chuckled, low and wet. "Every house by the sea has ghosts, my dear. You simply pay less for the ones who knock." Then she hung up. Clara slammed the phone down, trembling with fury. "We're leaving. Today." Marco looked at her, at the children still sleeping upstairs, at the footprints that were now dry and ghostly outlines on the tiles. And for the first time, he felt a chill deeper than fear itself. Because a part of him already knew this house wasn't going to let them leave so icily. By sunrise, Clara was already shoving clothes into bags. Her movements were frantic, jerky, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Marco tried to calm her, but she wouldn't hear it. "We're leaving," she snapped, her eyes wild. "Pack the children's things. We're not staying another night in this cursed place." Alina and Matteo stumbled bleary-eyed into the hallway, confused by the commotion. "But why?" Alina asked. "I like it here." Clara spun on her. "We're leaving, Alina. Don't argue." The girl's face crumpled, but she didn't speak again. Matteo dragged his little toy car across the floor, oblivious. He hummed a tune Marco didn't recognize, a wet, droning little melody that made Marco's scalp prickle. By 10, the family piled into the car, bags crammed into the trunk. Marco started the engine, relief loosening his chest. The house loomed behind them, shutters rattling softly in the morning wind. But when he drove up the narrow lane toward the main road, his relief evaporated. The lane ended abruptly in a sheet of water. Overnight, the tide had risen, spilling across the road and swallowing it whole. Where there should have been cracked asphalt, there was only the churning, restless sea. Clara gasped. That's impossible. The tide never comes up this far." Marco reversed sharply, sweat dripping down his back. He tried another route, the rocky track that wound toward the cliffs. But halfway up, fallen boulders blocked the way, jagged as teeth, too heavy to move, too many to climb. They were trapped. Back at the house, Marco phoned the village. The line crackled but connected, the grocer answered. "The road," Marco said desperately. "It's flooded. We can't leave. Can someone?" But the grocer cut him off, his voice thick with dread. "Stay inside. Lock the sea door. Whatever you do, don't let the child open it." The line went dead. Marco turned slowly. Clara was clutching Matteo's shoulders. The boy blinked at them, wide-eyed and innocent. "Why me?" he asked. No one answered. That night the knocking began earlier. Midnight hadn't even struck when the first 3 slow beats rattled the sea. Door knock, knock, knock. Alina covered her ears in bed. Clara pressed her back against the kitchen wall, whispering frantic prayers. Marco sat in the living room with a fire poker clenched in his hands, staring at the door, and Matteo. Matteo stood in the hallway, smiling faintly, humming that same strange tune. The knocks grew bolder each night. By the fifth, they were no longer patient taps, but hammering thuds, shaking dust loose from the ceiling beams. Each strike reverberated in Marco's ribs. Clara pressed pillows over Elena's ears upstairs, whispering to her daughter to ignore it. Ignore it. Ignore it. But Matteo? He had stopped being afraid. Marco caught him twice creeping down the stairs at night, his small body outlined in the glow of the sea-facing door. Each time his hand hovered near the latch as though the wood itself were whispering his name. "She wants to come in," Matteo said dreamily when Marco pulled him away. "She says she's lonely," Marco snapped. "Stop saying that, there's no she. It's the wind, or the sea, nothing else." Matteo only smiled, his eyes too old for his face. "You don't hear her because you don't listen." On the sixth night, Marco heard something new between the knocks. A voice. It seeped through the cracks of the door like water, low and gurgling, the syllables distorted but unmistakable. A woman's voice, wet with the sea, crooning Matteo's name, Ma, Tio, Apri. Clara clutched Marco's arm so tightly her nails drew blood. She's calling him. Marco shoved the sofa against the door, then the heavy cabinet, his hands shaking. He piled furniture like a barricade, sweating and swearing under his breath. The knocking continued, steady, relentless. And now with it came the sound of water dripping, pooling, seeping across the tiles. When dawn came, the barricade was intact, but the floor around the door was slick with seawater. It stank of brine and rot, and in the middle of the puddle was a toy car, Matteo's favorite, floating gently, as though set down by careful hands. Marco confronted his son at breakfast. "How did your toy get down there?" Matteo shrugged, spooning cereal with eerie calm. "She brought it to me. She said it was a gift." Elena shoved back her chair, eyes blazing. "Stop it. You're lying." "I'm not," Matteo replied. He turned to his sister with a smile that made Marco's stomach twist. "She says she likes you too, but she wants me first." That night, Marco didn't sleep at all. He sat in the dark living room with the poker across his lap, staring at the door while Clara whispered prayers upstairs. The knocks came, louder than ever, each one rattling the glass in the windows. And between them came the sound of dragging feet across wet stone, circling the house. The seventh night began with silence. For the first time in a week, there was no knocking at midnight, no wet voice, no dragging steps. The Rossi family sat in the living room, tense, as if waiting for a blow that never came. The silence was worse than the sound. "It's over," Marco whispered around 2 a.m, though his voice shook. "She's gone." Clara didn't believe him, but exhaustion pulled her under. Elena curled on the sofa beside her mother, too drained even to argue. Only Matteo stayed awake. He sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes fixed on the sea-facing door, humming his little drowned melody. When the sound came, it was not a knock, it was a creak. The latch slid free with a metallic click. Slowly, impossibly, the barricade of furniture groaned forward, pushed from the other side. Marco leapt up with a roar, jamming the fire poker into the gap, shoving against the door with all his strength. The air smelled of rot, of seaweed, of something that had been buried too long beneath water. "Stay back," he shouted. But Matteo rose calmly to his feet, his small hands pressed against Marco's arms. "It's okay, Papa. She's only a guest." And then the door blew open. The furniture toppled aside like children's toys. The stench of the sea poured in, cold and merciless. She stepped across the threshold. The drowned woman. Her gown clung to her body in tatters of black lace, dripping endless streams of seawater that pattered onto the tiles. Her hair hung in long ropes across a pale, swollen face. Her eyes were milk-white blind, yet they fixed directly on Matteo. Clara screamed, pulling Elena up the stairs. Marco swung the poker with a wild cry. The iron struck her shoulder, no resistance, no solid flesh. The poker passed through her like smoke. She didn't even glance at him. Her lips peeled back, revealing a mouthful of broken shells and dark water. She whispered in a voice like waves over gravel, "Matteo." The boy walked forward. Marco dropped the poker and grabbed his son, yanking him back. The water, soaking the tiles, surged upward, wrapping cold around his ankles, pulling. He fought, screaming his child's name, but Matteo was slipping through his arms as though the boy himself were becoming water. Clara shrieked from the stairs. "Marco! Don't let her take him." The drowned woman reached out, her fingers long and gray, dripping strands of kelp. Her hand brushed Matteo's cheek, and then just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The water on the floor vanished, leaving only the smell of rot. Marco collapsed, clutching Matteo. The boy's eyes fluttered open. He smiled faintly. "She says she'll come back tomorrow," he whispered. The final day was spent in silence. No one mentioned the night before. Marco spent hours dragging what was left of the furniture into a barricade twice as thick, wedging chairs and tables against the sea-facing door until the room looked like a fortress. His arms ached, his back screamed, but he worked with manic energy, as if wood and iron could keep the ocean itself at bay. Clara prayed in the bedroom with Alina, her voice hoarse, words tumbling together in half-forgotten Catholic chants. Alina clung to her, eyes wide, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. And Matteo sat at the window, staring out at the tide. His lips moved constantly, whispering words only he could hear. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he frowned. At one point, he pressed his palm to the glass, as if touching someone on the other side. Marco caught him once and dragged him away, shouting, "You don't talk to her. You understand me?" "You don't." But Matteo only looked at him calmly. "She promised. She keeps her promises." Night fell with cruel slowness. The house seemed to hold its breath as the hour approached. Every tick of the old clock on the mantel was a hammer blow in Marco's chest. Midnight came, and for a moment there was nothing. Then knock, 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 the sound rattled through the barricade. Furniture shuddered, dishes clinked in cupboards. Water seeped through the cracks, black and briny, creeping across the tiles in slender streams. Clara screamed upstairs. Lena began to sob. Marco planted himself before the door, clutching the fire poker, screaming hoarsely, "You can't have him, he's my son." But Matteo slipped past him. The boy moved with eerie calm, climbing the barricade like it was no obstacle at all. His small hands undid the latch from within. The door swung wide. She entered again. The drowned woman. Her body was slick with decay, hair hanging like a curtain of weeds. She filled the air with the stench of salt and death. But her blind eyes glowed faintly now, as if lit by something deep beneath the sea. She reached for Matteo. Marco lunged, grabbing his boy, pulling with all his strength. Clara flew down the stairs, clawing at her son's arm, shrieking his name. Alina clung to her mother, screaming too, but it was useless. The drowned woman opened her mouth, and a torrent of black water poured forth. It surged like a wave, knocking Marco and Clara backward, sweeping Alina against the wall. In the chaos, Matteo was lifted, carried gently into her arms. For one frozen second, Marco saw his son look back. The boy's expression wasn't fear. It was peace, as though he were going home. Then they were gone. The water vanished. The door slammed shut. The house was silent again. Marco and Clara searched the house, the shore, the village. They screamed Matteo's name until their voices shredded, but there was nothing, only the endless, pitiless sea. By morning, they fled the house with Alina, broken and hollow. They never returned, but someone else did. A week later, the old woman stood on the threshold, the sea-facing door wide open. She gazed at the wet footprints leading inside, and a thin smile curled her lips. "Another guest," she whispered. "Ow!" "The house is satisfied." For now, she shut the door, locking it with a key heavy with rust. And beyond it, in the hush of the waves, came the sound of a child's laughter.